Discuss this, military maneuvers, and the releashed budgetary watchdog. Let's call in the MPs. Stephen McKinnon is a Liberal MP from Quebec. Chris Warkentin is a Conservative MP from Alberta. Tracy Ramsey, an NDP MP from Ontario. Welcome, everybody. Census. I feel so, you guys are all, I don't even know where you are. You're all under 40, right? Right? No?
Some of us are.
Thank you.
No. Okay.
I'll take that, though.
Let's say you're under 40. I mean, are you sensing that the policy-wise, something has to change with the onslaught of seniors coming into the Canadian? I mean, it's not a new thing. It's not a surprising thing. Are we ready for this, Tracy, in your view?
We're not prepared for it, Don. There is a major shift that's happening in our country. It's a generational shift. Younger people are having fewer and fewer children. There are systemic problems and reasons for that. Part of it is the jobs that are available, the future that they see. When you talk to millennials, they say they can't even imagine having children because they can't own a home, which is another thing that we see coming out in the census. Fewer and fewer people are owning their own single-family detached homes. This is a dangerous trend that we're in. It's not to place blame on seniors who certainly have spent their lives building the country to the point that we have, but we have to address the issues that are facing the generation that is not having as many children. That we saw that number. The children are actually at the lowest level that we've seen in I believe a century, a very long time. So there's policies like childcare. There's policies like a strategy around affordable housing in our country. These strategies need to be addressed because of what we're facing in our population.
What do you think the government should be doing? I mean, you're obviously trying to look ahead, but this is 2030, 2040 type of thing before it peaks, before the aging population peaks. What do we have to do to get ready for that?
Well, obviously, all of this has huge policy implications. A lot of it around skills. We're starting to see a skills gap in Canada. I know you asked your previous guest about seniors working longer, and of course that's happening, some by choice, others of necessity. But we are, even in the federal government, seeing emerge the skills gap where we have to get our training strategies right. That means working with provinces productively in terms of funding training, in terms of identifying where those skills gaps are and where the jobs of tomorrow are. Right. The other thing, though, is every time we have this debate, and we've been having it for a couple of decades now, we've known about this demographic shift, this demographic bubble. I guess we don't start with the hypothesis that we are going to make unsustainable our healthcare program. We are going to make unsustainable our pension system. We actually, as Liberals, believe that we should put those on sustainable footing. We lowered that retirement age back to 65. We put money into the guaranteed income supplement for seniors, and we're making sure that health care is on a sustainable footing, and that we're putting money into things like home care, which is care cheaper, but oriented towards this aging population.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I feel sorry, Chris, for Atlantic provinces. You look at the statistics, and Atlantic provinces are stagnant in population growth. They're actually, in New Brunswick's case, shrinking, and yet they have the seniors bulge is the biggest problem there. Can you imagine the healthcare consequences for that in 10 years? I mean, there's a lot of implications of this.
But what we've seen is a significant demographic movement in this country where young people are going where there's jobs and opportunity, and so obviously
Alberta, here they come, right?
We've been the benefactor of that, and so we, living in the younger community, I live in one of the youngest communities in the country, and I can tell you that we've benefited because of that. And I think what that tells us as a country is we have to have economic opportunity in every part of this country, which means that we have to give employers the ability to hire in every community. We have to, unfortunately, the Liberals have been counterproductive in terms of continuing to drive people out of communities. We now have an exodus from the province of Ontario because of both the provincial and the federal government policies. What we don't want to do is make this an entire country problem where people are going to other countries where we see younger people looking for opportunities elsewhere. And that's what we've started to see over the last number of months as especially professionals start to look at where the opportunities are. We see a significant number going south of the border.
They might be coming back.
Well,
keep scaring them back.
I can tell you what we have noticed is that this is a challenge. We have to take it seriously. We have to continue to build opportunities in every community so that we have families deciding to build their futures in every one of our communities.
I want to get to this speech by Arjun Sajan today because he's pointing a lot of blame at the Conservatives. But, to be fair, the Conservatives balanced the budget. The Liberals put a $30 billion deficit on the board, and they still can't fund the military in a way that even meeting the status quo is no longer an option, according to the defense minister. Is this just a case that you've put priorities elsewhere and not on the military, and that's why we find ourselves in this pickle?
Well, let's be very clear. We're going to come out with a defense policy review. It'll be costed, and it will foresee major investments in our military. I, as Parliamentary Secretary in Public Services and Procurement, am aware of these major military procurements, many of which the Conservatives just couldn't get done. They didn't float a new ship. They didn't send a new fighter aircraft into the sky during their entire time in power. $2 billion a year reduction in our operational budgets for the Department of National Defense. That's money right out of the men and women in uniform. We are spending, the NATO measure of our spending vis-a-vis our GDP went down over the course of the Harper mandate, down below 1%. So let's get our facts straight here. Let's understand where we are. The minister, I think, was very eloquent in laying out today just where we are in terms of equipment. Recruitment was cut during the Harper time. We have a lack of
You know where the blame's going.
of new intake.
That's nothing for our men and women in military.
But all of this to say is that our military faces, as our fighter aircraft do, a capability gap. We have NORAD obligations, we have NATO obligations, we have obligations around the world. We're sending troops to Eastern Europe now. These things must be funded, and we have to have the right equipment for the job, and that's what we're going to do.
Well, Chris, sounds like you guys put us back in the decade of darkness.
Well, I
here.
think it was General Hillier that called the previous Liberal decade the decade of darkness before we came in and started to correct some of that.
Paul Martin appointed Rick Hillier.
Exactly, and what he recognized is while he was there that the Liberals had created a decade of darkness. So he was very encouraged when we actually doubled. Our last year in government we doubled the spending of any year over the previous Liberal decade. So there's no question there was massive increases in terms of the spending. What we had over the last decade as we were in government is every time that there was an investment that was initiated by our government and significant investments across the military arena, the Liberals opposed every single one of those investments. So it's interesting.
You had a majority. Come on, you're gonna
well, for the last
anyway.
4 years we did. Certainly we did, and we continue to invest.
Still didn't fly a new fighter aircraft. Still didn't float a new ship.
We have the largest shipbuilding initiative in this country's history, and the Liberals, of course, have opposed that. They continue to put the it's moving ahead, absolutely. But it was initiated by our government. We were very proud of that. We'll continue to support those types of initiatives. But it's interesting that this comes on the heels of what is essentially damage control week for the Liberals when it comes to the defense minister.
That's the point we're arguing about. But anyway, Tracy, these two say they're each other's worst enemies when it comes to doing the military. What do you say?
Here's the problem, Don. None of this rhetoric going back and forth saying which government is responsible does anything to help our men and women in the military today. And I do believe this is a pivot. There are certainly a lot of things going on with the defense minister that he needs to be upfront with, tell the truth. Not the truths, because we've heard several different truths, and there are not versions of the truth. There's one truth. And so Randall Garrison will be calling the minister before the committee, trying to get the minister to come and bring that truth. Let's find out what actually happened with the Afghan detainees. Let's find out what actually happened with the record. Let's actually find out what's been happening around spending. We need to find out the truth. Our men and women that are serving this country deserve that.
I didn't hear a proposal there.
I would make a proposal. I would suggest that the Liberals have cut $12 billion over the last two budgets when it comes to the military. There's $12 billion that have been cut. There's absolutely truth in black and white.
That money is still in the fiscal framework, and that money exists for procurement.
Yeah, so what you're suggesting
it's on hold.
is you will hold
It's
that
not on
money
hold.
for another decade, so we can have a decade of darkness.
It's a cash flow issue. It is a cash flow issue.
Well, clearly there's a cash flow issue.
$12 billion not spent. $12 billion not spent by the Liberals. Well, please mansplain it to me.
Well, you are a man. But,
I know exactly. But it's
all we have to do is ask NATO. 2005, Harper one number in terms of GDP. At the end of his term, it's lower. Harper cut money to he talked a good game. I'll give him that. Yeah. Talked a good game, but cut money to our men and women in uniform, closed recruitment offices, underspent veterans affairs, and didn't float a new ship.
$12 billion.
Didn't put a new fighter aircraft in the sky.
Heavy lift?
We have plans on all of those fronts.
Okay.
Plans, no money.
This is
No
going
money.
around
Well,
in
we
circles.
reopened
It
the
is.
Veterans
I
Office.
don't
And this
think
is the way that it
no one's
goes,
gonna
around in
resolve this
circles.
discussion.
And if you're talking to a man or woman who's serving, they never see the results of this rhetoric that comes from both parties. What they see is a lack of equipment, and they're unable to do their jobs properly.
Right. We'll leave it at that. But I want one more quickly, because the parliamentary budget officer was something the Stephen Harper government set up, and no one thought he'd get any more acrimonious between the PBO and a government until you guys came along,
Yeah.
Stephen McKinnon. Now they're saying basically what you're proposing in terms of giving them increased independence is worse than what they have now. Why are you trying to, control them on how much they can spend, what they can look at, what information they can access, whether they can do political party fund or platform costing? I mean, it sounds to me like you're really coming down on these guys in terms of a control freak nature.
We've presented a bill. We were doing exactly what we said we'd do. We'd elevate the PBO into a 7-year term. Complete independent mandate, much like other commissioners.
This isn't an independent mandate.
Much of independent.
Under the speaker, though.
Other independent. Well,
This is not independence.
Every officer of Parliament has a legislated mandate. Let's be clear about
that's
that.
true.
And this independent officer of Parliament will have a legislated mandate, just like
That
the
has
others.
to be approved by the Liberal Speaker.
Got to approve the work plan.
The bill will come before Parliament,
Okay.
and obviously we are open to suggestions from the PBO and other watchdogs. But this will provide increased oversight for
It will
parliamentarians, which is
It
the
will not.
Nobody
purpose
believes
of
you.
the
This is
job.
limiting freedom.
believes you.
This is limiting the independence of the PBO, and this is making the PBO do the government's bidding. This is not why the PBO exists. The PBO exists so that there can be an independent arm that looks at what the government is doing and reflect on that. What the government wants to do is squash that so that there can never be a voice. And let's be honest, the PBO often is out speaking against the government and revealing things that the government doesn't want revealed. So they're trying to squash that by controlling it so that people will not know what they're doing.
Fair enough. Chris, last word to you.
Well, I can tell you that this comes after a trend that this government has undertaken. They're reforming the standing orders to make the Liberal government less transparent, giving more power to the Liberal government, less to the opposition parties. This is another effort by them to reduce the ability for the opposition and Canadians to get the truth when it comes to the spending of this federal
Absolutely.
government.
All right. No, amendments are being entertained, though, right?
Absolutely.
Let's just leave it
there
at
will
that.
be public hearings. There will be committee
We've
study.
seen that with the standing
Yes.
orders.
There'll
Yeah,
be
we know
committee
how that
study of the
works.
bill, and we will
Okay.
we will fill
In the
this other
spirit of
commitment.
camaraderie and cooperation, you will entertain amendments. Oh, good. All right, Stephen, thanks you all. Have a good
Thanks,
weekend.
Tom.
We'll talk to you again.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, today.